to Indonesian International Islamic University. Established on June 5th, 2018. This campus is expected to be a place for the growth of faith and humanity. We recognize truth and humanity as our motto because we believe that Islamic values and humanity are always connected.
As an inclusive campus, IIU welcomes anyone regardless of differences in religious background, ethnicity, culture, gender, age, and abilities.
Delivering an international standard education, IIU is the only university in Indonesia that focuses on postgraduate education, namely master's and doctoral programs, since its establishment. In this campus, students learn their skills and deepen their knowledge in the fields of Islam, social sciences, economics and business, education, law, science and technology, and the arts. IIU is determined to help talented young people from all over the world, so this campus is made for talented youths to flourish. Thus, hundreds of prestigious young students from 5 continents have been registered as IIU students and are occupying our dormitories. At IIU, they study with professors, lecturers, academics, and researchers who have experience teaching in world campuses and graduates from well-known universities in Asia, America, Europe, the Middle East, and Australia. With strong support from the government of Indonesia, IIU continues to build infrastructure, management, faculty and library buildings, lecturer housing, dormitories, sports facilities, reforestation programs, and much, much more. We believe we can grow bigger than our dreams and hopes. We strive to continue to make improvements through various innovations, collaborations, as well as dialogue with students, lecturers, and staff in carrying out the university's vision and mission. Come to IIU and join future leaders from various countries to seek knowledge to the ends of the earth.
Welcome to Indonesian International Islamic University, a university that stands together in a diversity of cultures, languages, history, and also the beliefs inherent in the identity of Indonesia as a multicultural archipelagic country. Indonesian International Islamic University is the first international Islamic university in Indonesia that not only explores Islamic studies, but also introduces to the world an advanced Islamic civilization in Indonesia that is able to make a positive contribution through discovery, research, and global achievement.
Do you need high quality of international education right here in Indonesia? The place is at the Indonesian International Islamic University, or we call it IIU. IIU has 4 faculties. One of them is the Faculty of Education. The Faculty of Education offers MA and Ph.D. in education with 4 concentrations. First, curriculum teaching and learning. Second, educational assessment and evaluation. Third, education policy management and leadership. And 4, education and society. The 4 concentrations are designed to represent the ecological system, namely those that focus on the micro context, represented by the concentration of curriculum, teaching and learning, the meso context, represented by the concentration of educational assessment and evaluation, and the concentration of education, policy, management and leadership, while the concentration of education and society represent the context of a larger meso layer, linking it with the macro lenses of economics, politics, anthropology, and sociology of education.
And here, we are at the Faculty of Education, one of the faculty at IIU designed to produce high-quality transformative educators with a passion for lifelong learning. Our dedication to excellence and innovation sets us apart from the rest, and we are proud to be leading the way toward a brighter future for education.
The IIIU Faculty of Education offers a Master of Arts in Education program that prepares graduates for careers as academics, practitioners, designers, researchers, government officials, managers, supervisors, assessment specialists, evaluators, policy analysts, and consultants at national and international institutions. The program provides a comprehensive foundation in education covering theories, philosophies, practices, and their connection to society and culture. Graduates are equipped with the skill and knowledge necessary to succeed in education. The IIIU Faculty of Education is committed to providing students with a supportive and inclusive community. Our faculty comprises experts dedicated to helping students achieve their academic and professional goals. With resources and support available at IIIU, students have the opportunity to thrive and succeed in their chosen careers in the education sector.
The Faculty of Education is filled with experts and globally recognized lecturers who are able to share their passion, story, journey, and perspective with like-minded students.
Our Ph.D. program is designed for students who are passionate about education and want to make a significant contribution to the field. Our faculty members are experts in their respective areas of research, and our program provides students with the analytical tools and resources they need to conduct groundbreaking research and participate in global discussion. Our application process is highly competitive, but we encourage all qualified students to apply. You can visit our website for more information on the application requirements and deadlines. Let's make your dream come true with study in the Ph.D. program at the Faculty of Education, Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia.
On more than 140 hectares of land, Indonesian International Islamic University has built dozens of facilities to ensure a seamless experience and also a balance between academic activities and non-academic activities. Indonesian International Islamic University will always support the positive development and freedom of each individual, especially those related to physical, mental, and spiritual development. At IIIU, we will learn more, gain more, and give even more as we believe. Lesson shapes souls. Come and join us to shape the souls and create the future. Welcome to Indonesian International Islamic University. A university that stands together in a diversity of cultures, languages, history, and also the beliefs inherent in the identity of Indonesia as a multicultural archipelagic country. Indonesian International Islamic University is the first international Islamic university in Indonesia that not only explores Islamic studies, but also introduces to the world an advanced Islamic civilization in Indonesia that is able to make a positive contribution through discovery, research, and global achievement.
You need high quality of international education right here in Indonesia. The place is at the Indonesian International Islamic University, or we call it IIIU. IIIU has 4 faculties. One of them is the Faculty of Education. The Faculty of Education offers M.A. and Ph.D. in education with 4 concentrations. First, curriculum teaching and learning. Second, educational assessment and evaluation. Third, education policy management and leadership. And 4, education and society. The 4 concentrations are designed to represent the ecological system, namely those that focus on the micro context, represented by the concentration of curriculum, teaching and learning, the meso context represented by the concentration of educational assessment and evaluation, and the concentration of education, policy, management, and leadership, while the concentration of education and society represent the context of a larger measure layer, linking it with the macro lenses of economics, politics, anthropology, and sociology of education.
And here, we are at the Faculty of Education, one of the faculty at IIIU designed to produce high-quality transformative educators with a passion for lifelong learning. Our dedication to excellence and innovation sets us apart from the rest, and we are proud to be leading the way toward a brighter future for education.
The IIIU Faculty of Education offers a Master of Arts in Education program that prepares graduates for careers as academics, practitioners, designers, researchers, government officials, managers, supervisors, assessment specialists, evaluators, policy analysts, and consultants at national and international institutions. The program provides a comprehensive foundation in education covering theories, philosophies, practices, and their connection to society and culture. Graduates are equipped with the skill and knowledge necessary to succeed in education. The IIIU Faculty of Education is committed to providing students with a supportive and inclusive community. Our faculty comprises experts dedicated to helping students achieve their academic and professional goals. With resources and support available at IIIU, students have the opportunity to thrive in chosen careers in the education sector.
The Faculty of Education is filled with experts and globally recognized lecturers who are able to share their passion, story, journey, and perspective with like-minded students.
Our Ph.D. program is designed for students who are passionate about education and want to make a significant contribution to the field. Our faculty members are experts in their respective areas of research, and our program provides students with the analytical tools and resources they need to conduct groundbreaking research and participate in global discussion. Our application process is highly competitive, but we encourage all qualified students to apply. You can visit our website for more information on the application requirements and deadlines. Let's make your dream come true with study in the Ph.D. program at the Faculty of Education, Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia.
On more than 140 hectares of land, Indonesian International Islamic University has built dozens of facilities to ensure a seamless experience and also a balance between academic activities and non-academic activities. Indonesian International Islamic University will always support the positive development and freedom of each individual, especially those related to physical, mental, and spiritual development. At IIIU, we will learn more, gain more, and give even more as we believe. Lesson shapes souls. Come and join us to shape the souls and create the future.
Welcome to Indonesian International Islamic University. Established on June 5th, 2018. This campus is expected to be a place for the growth of faith and humanity. We recognize truth and humanity as our motto because we believe that Islamic values and humanity are always connected.
As an inclusive campus, IIIU welcomes anyone regardless of differences in religious background, ethnicity, culture, gender, age, and abilities.
Delivering an international standard education, IIIU is the only university in Indonesia that focuses on postgraduate education, namely master's and doctoral programs, since its establishment. In this campus, students learn their skills and deepen their knowledge in the fields of Islam, social sciences, economics and business, education, law, science and technology, and the arts. IIIU is determined to help talented young people from all over the world. So this campus is made for talented youths to flourish. Thus, hundreds of prestigious young students from 5 continents have been registered as IIIU students and are occupying our dormitories. At IIIU, they study with professors, lecturers, academics, and researchers who have experience teaching in world campuses and graduates from well-known universities.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, to all
America,
participants
Europe, the
remaining
Middle East,
outside,
and Australia.
we humbly request you to enter into the hall
With strong
and have your
support from the
seat,
government of
especially
Indonesia,
in the first
IIIU
row, second and
continues to
third,
build
because
infrastructure,
within few minutes we are going to start the
faculty and
event.
library buildings,
Once
lecture
again,
housing,
we humbly
dormitories,
request to
sports
all
facilities,
participants who are still remaining
reforestation
outside,
programs, and
please
much more.
come to the hall. Within few minutes we are going to start the event.
Dreams and hopes. We strive to continue to make improvements through various innovations, collaborations, as well as dialogue with students, lecturers, and staff in carrying out the university's vision and mission. Come to IIIU and join future leaders from various countries to seek knowledge to the ends of the earth.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Excellency Keynote Speaker, Clara Maria Hefner, Ph.D., Union College, United States of America. Dr. Farah Akbar, University of Edinburgh, United Kingdom. Professor Dr. Jérémy James, Research Institute on Contemporary Southeast Asia, Thailand. The Honorable Rector of Universitas Islam International Indonesia, Dean of the Faculty of Education, Professor Nina Nurmila, Ph.D., Head of Master and Ph.D. Program of the Faculty of Education, respected lecturers, honorable guests, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to the second day of our conference. It is truly a pleasure to see you all again, especially looking refreshed and ready for another day of inspiring discussions. Over the past sessions, we have shared ideas, insight, and meaningful conversations, and we hope today will bring even more inspirations, fresh perspective, and perhaps ideas for collaborative with other speakers. For today's event, we will have 2 keynote speakers before noon, 3 panel sessions, and finally closing by 4 p.m. Before we begin, allow me to share a short pantun to brighten the start of our day. Please help us with cakep.
Cakep.
Pergi ke taman memetik melati.
Cakep.
Harumnya semerbak di pagi hari.
Cakep. May our ideas grow in clarity and today's session spark creativity.
Thank you. Without further ado, let us begin today's program.
We'll now proceed to the third keynote speaker by Dr. Farah Akbar from the University of Edinburgh, United Kingdom. And she'll be delivering a keynote speech entitled Learning to Unlearn, Decolonizing Educations for Inclusive Futures. And this session will be moderated by Faradila Haryani, PhD students in Batch 2. To Dr. Farah and Miss Fani, time is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for the speakers and the moderators.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Director of Universitas Islam International Indonesia, Professor Jamhari, the Dean of Faculty of Education, Professor Nina Nurmila, the distinguished keynote speakers, Professor James, Professor Claire, Dr. Farah Akbar, for all faculty members of Faculty of Educations, and all respected audiences and conference participants. Welcome back to the second day of the 5th of Annual Conference of Educations, and we are now entering the third sessions of keynote speakers with me, Farah as a PhD student of Batch 2. I'm really honored and privileged to be a moderator of today's sessions. So we now move into our third keynote speaker session with our distinguished keynote speakers, Dr. Farah Akbar from the University of Edinburgh. And this session is actually invite us to think differently about educations, not only as a process of gaining knowledge, but also as a process of questioning what we have already learned. Whose knowledge is actually taught, whose voice is actually missing, and is it natural? And how do we build education systems that are truly inclusive for everyone? These are the important questions that guiding our discussion today with our distinguished keynote speakers, Dr. Farah Akbar from University of Edinburgh. Before we are actually starting our keynote speaker sessions, please allow me to introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Farah Akbar is a senior lecturer in language education at the Institute for Language Education, Moray House Schools of Education and Sport, University of Edinburgh, United Kingdom. She is also senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy. She holds a Ph.D. in linguistics from the University of Essex and has previously taught at the University of Southampton before joining the University of Edinburgh in 2015. Her research sits at the intersections of language education, equity, and social justice, focusing on decolonizing curriculum, teacher identity, assessment literacy, design instructional materials, and building inclusive communities in higher educations. What makes Dr. Farah Akbar presents here is more significant is her current work directly connected to the United Kingdom and Indonesia. She is currently serving as a principal investigator of a British Council-funded project entitled Building Equitable Transnational Education Opportunities in Language Education between UK and Indonesia. And her visit today also marks the beginning of the dual degree collaborations program between Universitas Islam International Indonesia and the University of Edinburgh, a partnership that will open exciting new pathways for our students to gain world-class educations across two countries. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in warmly welcoming Dr. Farah Akbar, who will deliver her keynote address entitled Learning to Unlearn, Decolonizing Education for Inclusive Futures. Dr. Farah Akbar, please. Please give a warm applause for her.
All right, Assalamualaikum everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. I feel that I have to come up here and do something massive, like give a UN speech, because it was a really good welcome. Thanks very much for that. Good morning, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning to everybody. First of all, thank you very much to the Faculty of Education for inviting me to speak today and to be part of this very important conversation around global justice. Special thank you to Professor Nina Nurmila, Dr. Tati, Pak Bambang, Afra, who I've not met yet. I'm really looking forward to meet Afra. And these are the people that I've been in communication with for the past couple of months, and it's really nice to see them in the flesh. I also want to say thank you and congratulations to the conference committee for organizing this event. It's not an easy task. It's not a small feat to be organizing an event like this. And from what I see, it's looking very, very successful. So well done. Okay. So I'd like to begin by being very, very clear about what I'm offering to all of you in the next 1 hour. In that, by the end of this talk, I want you to leave with two things. a way of identifying what you're teaching and learning. Sorry. Can you hear me? Better? Okay. So as I said, I want to leave you with two things. The first being a way of identifying what you're teaching and learning take for granted as normal. Yeah? And the other one is one concrete place where you can begin to change if you want to change. You see, as an academic, I think myself as a research-led practitioner. Yeah? So my work sits at the intersection of research and practice. So I'm very, very interested in what happens in real classroom, yeah? In your classroom, in my classroom. In that, what do we do in them? What do we assume? And what do we take for granted in our classrooms? Yeah? So what I'll share today with you comes from my own teaching, my work with my students, and the questions that has come out of that. Yeah? At the same time, what I'm about to present to you is not just my personal reflection. It's grounded in academic work, including research that I've developed with my colleagues. Yeah? So what I'm offering to all of you today is a position, one that sits between theory and practice, because to me, that's where real work happens. Are you in it? Okay. Now, I think that this is the last thing that you would have expected coming here, to have a quiz. Are you ready for a quiz? Okay. Now, so before I start talking about unlearning, I want to ask you a few questions. It's not a quiz, it's not a test. I don't want to test whether you know certain things or not, but what I want to find out from all of you is to see how or what feels obvious to you when I ask these questions, okay? What feels obvious? And when you answer these questions, what comes to your mind, the first thing that comes to your mind, right? So here's your quiz. Are we ready? Okay. First question, which country from the African continent has got the most numbers of pyramids with around 220? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? Egypt. Okay. Anybody else has got a different answer? Egypt? No. Okay, hold on to that, yeah? The next one. The oldest university at the first degree awarding educational institution in the world, according to UNESCO and Guinness World Records, is ABCD. Which one would you choose? I knew this was an easy one for all of you. A? Somebody said A. Delta. Anybody says Oxford? Come on. Oxford. But Bambagi said Oxford. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, let's park that for a bit. Now this one, I probably need, let's see. We're going to either watch or listen something from YouTube. Let's see if that works. Oopsie daisies. Maybe somebody from IT can help. So listen to this song. You know this song? I'm looking at Claire and Jérémy. Maybe not. Okay, I think that's enough. Okay, so some of you know this song. This is the question to the song. Now, this song is famously known as Sukiyaki, so those who know, okay? It's a very famous song from the 1960s, so you can guess my age. It's become a global hit at that point. As I said, some of you know it as Sukiyaki, but the original title of this song, and I'm not going to attempt, it's in Japanese. I think it's Ue Muiti Arukuo. If anybody who speaks Japanese, sorry, I've just chopped that. So that's the original title of the song. So the question, It became an international hit. Which of the following statement is true? We've got really, really eager students down here. Anybody about the rest? So I've got D, A, B, C, Delta, Delta. Okay. Now, okay, well, let's go back for a bit. So everybody said Egypt, and people will say Egypt. The real answer is Sudan. Sudan. We didn't think about that, okay. This one, oopsies. Oof. Everybody got this right? Okay, so this would be Al-Qarawiyyin, University in Morocco, yeah? Did anybody sort of think about, oh, maybe it's Oxford, oh, maybe it's Harvard, but it's not there, right? And this one, it is D. It's chosen because to make it more palatable and relatable to Western listeners. So the questions were quite simple, right? It's quite simple, yeah? Some of you answered quickly, some of you answered correctly, some would not. But that's not the point. That's not what I wanted to ask. I was interested to find out how quickly certain answers feel obvious to you, especially the first one, Egypt, Egypt, Egypt. Can't be Sudan, because that's an obvious answer, yeah? Because it feels normal. It feels neutral. When we think about pyramids, it has to be Egypt. So try and think back, which answers felt obvious to you beyond number one, and why? Why was it so obvious? Why did you think it was Egypt and not Sudan? Because those answers didn't come from nowhere. They came from what we've been exposed to, yeah? What gets repeated, what becomes visible. And over time, some knowledge travels further, yeah? It becomes dominant. It becomes normal. And once something feels normal, Egypt, 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 yeah, we stop questioning it. We don't go like, Sudan? Could be Sudan. Yeah, we don't question it. We stop asking, where did this come from? We stop asking, whose perspective does this reflect? The Egyptians? What might we be missing? And eventually, it starts to feel like the only knowledge that exists. Yeah? So it's not just that we didn't know the answer, it's we no longer question. And this is the point I want to be very, very clear about. What feels normal is not neutral. And I'll come back to this again and again and again. What feels normal is not neutral. And this doesn't just happen with general knowledge. It happens quite a lot in education, especially in higher education, yeah? In our classrooms, in our reading lists, in the frameworks that we use, that we teach, the as Ph.D. or master's students that we read and use and we rely on. We're surrounded by knowledge that feels objective, that feels universal, that feels standard, whatever standard means. But that knowledge, it's not neutral. It's historically produced, it's selective, and usually it reflects a certain perspective. Okay? So, when we start recognizing this, yeah, when we start recognizing that knowledge is not neutral, it's not equally represented, one of the most common responses in higher education, certainly in the UK, is this concept of inclusion. And I'm sure everybody have heard that. In higher education, inclusion is mostly understood as broadening participation. Yeah? So we are including more voices, including more perspectives. We try to diversify the curriculum. We create space for knowledges from the global south, knowledges from the global north, knowledges from the indigenous people, okay? And in the UK, we at the universities talk about inclusion all the time. That's like the buzzword, yeah? So in practice, that means more diverse student body, more international staff, more representation. This is all good. It's good response to inclusion. But there's an issue here. Because inclusion usually means you are allowed into an existing system, but the system itself does not change. In other words, you are included, but you are expected to adapt. You're expected to adapt in order to fit in order to assimilate. And I see this in my own teaching. Yeah? I'm guilty of it. I was creating space for students to speak. I was encouraging participation. Yeah, tell me about, from your local context, tell me all about it. But I didn't change what counted as knowledge in that space. Yep, so I'm guilty of it. Yep, students spoke, the ideas acknowledged, and then the discussion returned to the same authors, the same frameworks, and the same assumptions. Yeah? So scholars right now are asking this very difficult question: is inclusion enough? Is it enough? And this is what I want to bring in my colleague's work, Fakunle 2024, and her work is really, really important here. She argues that inclusion, as it is often practiced, can be quite surface level, quite superficial. In other words, it looks diverse, but the power structures remain the same. So the same assumptions, the same norms, the same centers of power. So the key idea here is inclusion might bring people in, but it doesn't necessarily change who has the power and whose knowledge is valued. So, okay. So this is where the idea of decolonizing education becomes necessary, becomes relevant. Because once we begin to question what feels normal, we're no longer just talking about inclusion, yeah? But we're talking about how knowledge itself is structured. Now, when I use the term decolonizing education, I'm using in a very specific meaning because decolonizing education could mean differently to a lot of people, and that's fine. But for me, it's about questioning how knowledge is produced, whose knowledge is prioritized, and what is recognized as valid. So to me, decolonizing education goes beyond just adding perspectives or just diversifying content. It asks us to look at what sits in the center, what sits in the middle, okay? And this is where, again, my colleague, Fakunle, she introduces this idea of centrality. And centrality asks us to shift the question, not just asking how do we include more people, but who is at the center? The center of what? The center of knowledge, the center of decision-making, the center of influence. Because in many universities, and I say in the UK, you can have diversity, you can have representation, but still the same voices, or rather, but still some voices are closer to the center, and others remain at the edges, at the periphery, even when they're present. Yeah? So think about your classroom. Okay, so again, Fakunle, 2024, goes on to argue, now again, please bear in mind, I'm talking based on my context in the UK. So you need to think if this applies to your own context, okay? I'm not saying that what I'm saying will apply to you, but this is my observation. So Fakunle says, international students, and she was talking about international students in the UK, especially from the global south, and I think we are in the global south, are usually positioned as receivers of knowledge. Yeah? We're the empty vessel. We go there to study, please fill us up. This is what she says. Because people who come to learn about Western knowledge systems in the UK are seen as empty vessels. But we need to challenge that. We need to see international students instead as knowledge producers. And I see some international students here. We need to see them as people who bring their own knowledge, their own perspectives, yeah, their own ways of understanding the world, their epistemologies, and they should be valued. In other words, Fakunle says, they are epistemic agents. Yeah? They're not just learners, they're people who create knowledge or co-create knowledge with you, who shape discussions, who contribute intellectually. And this connects to decoloniality. Yes, I know colonialism has ended, politically it has ended, but its effects continue in how knowledge operates. It affects continue in how knowledge gets published, what gets published, who gets cited, what gets recognized as authoritative. Yeah? So this is not just about the past, it's the present. It's the present condition and situation. It shapes what we see as rigorous, what we see as academic, what we see as standard, again, whatever standard means. And usually, we don't notice it because we're inside, we're working inside it, we're in the system, we're in the structure, yeah? I want to be very clear here because I don't want you to think that, is this about rejecting existing Western knowledge? No, this is not about rejecting existing knowledge. It's about decentering its dominance. Yeah? So that other ways of knowledge can also exist alongside on their own. So, once we start to see this, the question becomes, how do we work differently? What do we do? And for me, it has been this concept of unlearning. This was my entry point. Yeah? And I read Tufte. Tufte talks about unlearning as a pedagogy, not unlearning as forgetting. It's not about unlearning and let's erase from your mind, but unlearning as noticing. Yeah? Noticing what we were never asked to question. Because much of what we treat as academic, they don't get constructed, doesn't feel constructed. It feels natural, yeah? It feels normal. It doesn't feel that we are co-constructing it. And that's the issue, because what feels normal is often what has been most normalized, yeah? And as I said, unlearning is not about replacing knowledge. It's about changing how we relate to it, how we interpret it, how we evaluate it, how we decide what counts. Okay, so that's unlearning. So this is where my work becomes a bit more structured. This is when I thought about, what do we do? Yeah, so again, together with my colleague Fakunle, we developed this 3 connected processes. And we called it a practice-informed framework because it was based on our practices. Yeah? And they are deconstruction, empowerment, and reflection. Okay, so the first process is deconstruction. It's about questioning what feels normal, and you'll hear me say the word normal, normal, normal again and again, because that is the focus. Questioning what feels normal. It's about making the familiar visible, bring it to the fore, because this is where unlearning begins. Yeah? And I want to share with you a classroom incident that got me thinking about this framework a couple of years ago. You see, in Edinburgh, I teach postgraduate students, I teach master's students, I teach Ph.D. students, and most of my master's students are in-service and pre-service language teachers. So these are teachers who've got expertise in English, Arabic, Russian, Mandarin, yeah, and they want to go out to become language teachers. And one day we were discussing this concept of communicative competence. Anybody familiar with that concept, communicative competence? Yeah? How to be a good communicator, how you can speak well. So we turned to this framework called CEFR. Anybody familiar with CFR? If you're a language teacher or teaching language, you'll be very familiar with this. So CFR, which is not here, sorry, is the Common European Framework of References for Languages, okay? So it's an international standard for describing language proficiency. It's widely used. So for example, if you had to take IELTS, right? And one of the components of IELTS is this speaking, right? And you will be benchmarked against criteria in CEFR, okay? Right, so this is a very common framework. It's often treated as standard. So my students sort of accepted this CEFR without much question. And although it means Common European Framework, a lot of Asian countries will subscribe to CEFR in their language courses as well. Okay, so yeah, so my students are like, yeah, CEFR, we know about it. Yeah, we agree, it's really good. And then I asked them something very, very simple. I said, if we take this framework seriously, tell me, what does it mean to be a good communicator? What does it mean to be a good communicator? And the answers were quite, consistent. So they say, oh, it's someone who expresses ideas clearly, someone who responds quickly, who speaks confidently, who structures their arguments well. Those are good communicators. Okay, I said. Then I asked another question. I said, what happens to students who don't speak immediately, don't interrupt, they take time before they respond, and then they prioritize listening before they speak? What happens to them? Are they less competent? Are they communicating differently? And that's when their eyes were blinking. They were looking at each other like, what? Yeah. Because what the CEFR framework gives us is not a neutral description of communication. It's a particular model of communication. What it does, it treats communication as an individual skill. It's something that you perform. It's something that can be measured. But in real classrooms, communication doesn't work like that, does it? Yeah? It's shaped by context. It's shaped by relationships. It's shaped by who is speaking to whom, right? And this becomes even more visible when we look beyond the Western context, because many of these assumptions come from a specific tradition. And in that tradition, being a good communicator often means being assertive, being explicit, expressing yourself clearly. But that's not universal, because in other traditions, including the Confucius perspectives, and many of my students come from that context, and they are influenced by this Confucius tradition, communication is understood differently. It's not just about expressing yourself. It's about sensing the situation. It's about responding appropriately. And sometimes, or most of the time, it's about maintaining relationship. Yeah? So not speaking immediately doesn't necessarily mean lack of competence, doesn't necessarily mean not a good communicator. It may mean respect. It may mean attentiveness. It may mean awareness. Yeah? And this is the point. When we apply one specific framework like CEFR across all contexts, we may not just misunderstand our students, we may even misjudge them. Yeah? And the issue with CEFR is not just how students communicate, it's how we define communication in the first place. So going back to my first framework, deconstruction is about asking, why is this treated as standard? What does this framework reflect? What assumptions are built into it? Because different knowledge systems produce different expectations. But of course, deconstruction alone is not enough, because once we begin to question, we create this uncertainty. So the next step is empowerment. And in our work, we describe empowerment as a shift, okay, from, as I said earlier in the previous slides, a shift from students as consumers of knowledge to students as producers of knowledge. And this is where context becomes very critical. Because very often, knowledge that comes from outside dominant traditions, yeah, the main standard ones, those are treated as local, okay? The knowledges that comes from outside dominant traditions, they're treated as local, as cultural, as contextual, but not as, or not always as theoretical, okay? And I think this is where we need to be careful, because local does not mean limited. It's not there, sorry. So local doesn't mean limited. Local knowledge doesn't mean limited, yeah? I'm going to give you another example. I supervised a PhD student 2 years ago. So she completed, I think, about 2 years ago. And her PhD was on teacher creativity, language teacher, classroom creativity. And she happens to be from Indonesia. And she used the concept, help me, is it try or tree sakta jiwa? Tree. Tree sakti jiwa, sorry. So she used this concept to conceptualize teacher creativity. You're familiar with this concept? No, okay, ooh. Go and find out about it. It's a very interesting read. So she found a concept that is within her context to conceptualize teacher creativity. Mind you, she didn't use this as an example. She used this as the framework itself. So instead of applying theory, a dominant theory, to context, she was generating theory from context. And it guided how creativity was defined and how it was analyzed. And this was really empowering to her. This was really powerful, because she was not only engaging with knowledge, she was also shaping it and reshaping it. And that's empowering, isn't it? Yeah? So that's the second part of the framework. And the last one, the third process is reflection. And this runs throughout, yeah? Because reflection doesn't just happen at the end. It's continuous. When we talk about reflection, it's always at the end of something. But this is not what I meant, what we meant here. It's about noticing what's happening, questioning our assumptions, and adjusting what we do, and then to do all over again. So it's ongoing, yeah? So in reflecting as a teacher, I would ask myself questions like this. What am I still taking for granted? So I would teach, and I go back and ask myself, what am I teaching? Sorry, what am I still taking for granted? Where am I reinforcing what I'm trying to challenge? So really asking yourself, yeah? So that's reflecting, and that happens at all stages. Now, we need to consider something else. I think every speaker's slide will have something, some form of AI, right? Knowledge is no longer shaped only by educators, yeah? It's increasingly shaped by AI. And usually AI is presented as neutral, it's objective, it's a tool. But we all know that AI is trained on existing knowledge, right? And that knowledge is already structured. So AI doesn't just use knowledge, it inherits its hierarchies, yeah? And unlike classrooms, AI scales. So what is already dominant can be produced and reproduced faster, wider, and with more authority, yeah? Now, we might say that AI increases access, okay? And it does. I agree 100%. It does increase access. But we need to ask the question, access to what? Because if the system doesn't change, AI doesn't really fix inequality, right? The issue is, AI sounds convincing, but convincing doesn't mean neutral. And it doesn't always mean valid, correct. Yeah? So this is where the framework that I've just shared with you, yeah, the 3 processes of deconstruction, empowerment, reflection, is useful because it helps us to critically engage with knowledge that is generated in AI sense for us. Yeah? So, I'll end with this. Pay attention to what feels normal in your teaching. Yeah? What you include, what you prioritize, what you take for granted. Pay attention to them, because what feels normal is not neutral. Yeah? And that's my tagline. And when we stop questioning those choices, we start reproducing them. So when you go back to your context, when you go back to your classrooms, to your workshops, to your tutorial, to your lectures, if you buy what I say today, don't try to change everything. Just one thing, one reading, one moment of your teaching or learning, one decision, because that's where you can start to make a meaningful change. And with that, I thank you. I will take questions, but I've got a survey. I start with a quiz, I end with a survey, okay? And this survey, I'd like to ask for your help to sort of, take a moment to sort of reflect on what I've said, yeah? There's no right or wrong answer, but this is just a reflection for you and for me to understand your context in terms of decolonizing education. So if you can do this, that'd be really great, but I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. Or if not just questions, any insights or any ideas that you've sort of thought of as I spoke. I'd be really interested to hear that. Shall I give that to you? Yeah. Does the survey work? Do you get to the survey? Good. It takes only a couple of minutes. I think that's only 5, 6, 7 questions, not a lot. Sorry.
Thank you very much, and give a warm round of applause for Dr. Farah Akbar again. It's a very interesting session, and it's actually also like invites us again, like rethinking about something that feels normal, because it doesn't feel natural, yeah. So it's also like giving us the opportunity for being like, I think like more skeptical to something that we usually make it like, take it as a granted by having like these contractions, empowerment, and also reflections. Thank you very much, Dr. Farah Akbar. Now we invite a question and answer. I believe that the audience is actually really eager to ask the question about this things, especially because we want to know, yeah, about some things that is not natural at all. Yes, I think we can give the questions for ladies first, I think.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It's a very interesting topics, and basically it's also resonate with what the work that I do. So I'm finishing my master at the University of Queensland, focusing on inclusive education. But along my study, I start to learning how, like the concept of inclusive education, somehow it's not really, it's really hard to be applied in Indonesia. So when I'm going back and then, like in this last semester and until now, I'm, like still thinking out, previously people may think that it's because our resources is not really comprehensive. But then right now, I'm start to thinking that perhaps the design of the concept itself is not designed for the country like Indonesia in some cases. Like perhaps the concept, because inclusive education basically root from the CRPD, the General Comment of the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. And yeah, we can discuss it more, but then right now I'm working on raising the awareness of indigenous community in Indonesia, in Borneo, the islands of Borneo, about the disability inclusion. And then I try to decolonizing the concept of inclusive disability inclusion itself to fit the indigenous knowledge. And along the work, when I design the training, I find it's really challenging to really, somehow I find the value of the community that may be not really positive for the concept of disability inclusion itself, because they have the prejudice of the disability that it's perhaps because of the curse or so at this time I start how to generate the framework to to align which one of the local knowledge that we can, how can we define that's local knowledge that it's positive, it's negative, but sometimes I start to think, is it allowed to, to have a judgment about the local knowledge itself, that's kind of dilemma that I have. But we have a disability inclusion concept, internationally accepted, but how about the local knowledge? Then when we work it, it doesn't fit. So how, that's the dilemma. Yeah, thank you so much.
Are you going to answer it one by one, or?
Before I forget, because I don't think that's even a question, that's you sharing with us the very good work that you're doing. So well done.
That's a dilemma. Maybe you have the answer.
Well, you asked me how do you delineate between local knowledge and more dominant knowledge? Maybe that's one of the questions. And how do you determine, if I can understand correctly, how do you help with the local knowledge in terms of, because you talk about disability and how that's being seen as a curse, and then you're thinking more of how do we bring this away from thinking that as a curse? I mean, I don't have an answer to that. Good luck on that for you, but I think there's no wrong or right answer. Yeah, it's about awareness. If in this case that you say, well, the local knowledge talks about disability, and that's one definition of inclusion, when it talks about disability. If they see it in a negative sense, I think it's about having that conversation. Yeah, it's not a right or wrong answer. It's not about you bringing them over to the dominant side. Says this is not a curse. It's talking, discussing, questioning, and reflecting. That's what you do. I don't think it's our job to say what's right or what's wrong. Yeah, because already what you're doing is massive. Yep, and I think you will probably arrive to a destination where this feels right. Not right or wrong, but this is where we should be. Yeah, so it's reflecting, it's having that conversations. So that's what I would say. I wouldn't be able to give you how to do it. I wouldn't know. But I think you're doing a stellar job just going into that field in that arena. So congratulations. I'd be very interested to read your work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the answer. I think we are moving forward to the next. I think we are giving the questions for Aksan first, Prof. Na. Yes, please. After that, we are moving to Prof. Nina. I don't think so.
Thank you so much. My name is Ihsan. I'm from the Philippines. I'm sorry, stand up. So thank you so much, Dr. Farah Akbar. I really like your lecture today. It's about inclusion and especially in higher education. So I'm just curious, you mentioned about the power of empowerment, the construction, and reflection from the perspective of students, higher education students, especially postgraduate, because in transformative learning or transformative learning for adults, it can be quite challenging for them to challenge their own perspective. Like they have to be in a new setting. And I'm curious, in classroom setting, I'm sorry, am I audible? Okay. So I'm just curious, like in international setting, wherein it involves intercultural learning, particularly coming from different cultural backgrounds, some from Africa, Australia, other countries in Southeast Asia, how do we ensure that student voices are equitably included, not selectively included? And how do students safely navigate the challenge of power distribution within classroom setting, wherein they can safely challenge not just their own perspective, but the perspective of their lecturers, so that it can be really as engaging as you mentioned it to be. What kind of collective inclusion or selective inclusion have you found so far that can be a challenge that other students can relate from? Thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much. It's a very good question. It's a loaded question, but if you do read Tufte in her Unlearning as a Pedagogy, one of the strategy is to listen. Not listening to be heard, but to listen to make change. Because you said about how do we contribute our voices, right? And how do we make that contribution meaningful? And part of it is to listen, not to listen as, we're just adding voices, but to listen to be open to be challenged. So there's another concept called disruptive reframing, and you can find the reference at the end, which I should have shared. Disruptive reframing can feed into this idea of unlearning and listening, in that when you listen, be open to be questioned, to be contested, right? To think that I might be wrong, I might be right. Because oftentimes, when we contribute, we listen, but we don't reflect further. When we listen, we don't recognize. So recognition is another level of inclusion. We can have inclusion, and then we can go home. But we can have inclusion and recognize there are other knowledges, right? And to recognize means you have to disrupt your understanding, your perception, your beliefs, okay? Now, on the question of this power play, right? Because it can demean or it can do damage sometimes, but it's about being open. Yeah, it's about unlearning again. Because if you're not open and you don't want to challenge yourself, then why are you in the classroom in the first place? Now, one of the things that we do in our institute, we have a master's program called Language and Intercultural Communication, where there's a lot of discussion on interculturality. We often have like a charter or a rule, how to behave in class, how to accept and how not to accept, right? Is be open to the idea of disruption. Yeah? And when you're open to that, then you are open to listen and to recognize, not necessarily to agree. Yeah? So the concepts that I probably want to direct you is disruptive reframing by Gamal, and maybe the strategies of unlearning, which is listening. So you can find the reference in my reference list. I think that would be a good place to start. But thanks very much for the question. That's a really good one.
All right, we are now proceeding to the questions from Professor Nina.
Actually, I have a simple questions about your redefinition about good communicator. Perhaps the IT can help me go to that slide about the good communicator, because when you say good communicator at the top, well, that's what I expect actually when we communicate. So like very clear, well structured, very fast response, and I actually do not expect someone to be like only silent and then, well, I still wait for the good communicators. I think the slide, yeah. So, okay, I can understand if, for example, listening, if it is like a direct communication, face-to-face communication. But how about if, for example, we communicate in writing, yeah? How if people do not respond? No, and very slow respond, yeah? How do you consider that as a good communicator when people do not respond as we expect? Yeah, that's my question, but the slide is not there. Thank you.
Prof. Nina, so you're talking about the expectation in communicating through writing?
Yeah, I think, yeah, this one. Okay, be previously, good communicator. Previously, there, this one. What is a good communicator? Yeah, so when I communicate, I want to have like clear, confident, quick to respond, well structured.
Yeah.
So this might be my definition.
Yeah.
So what it is hard for me to understand but what about silence, listening, delay response, relational awareness? That's what I try to understand. So could you explain again about in the below one? Thank you very much.
So yeah, I guess I'm not saying that a good communicator shouldn't have the one that says at the top, clear, confident. I'm not saying that, not negating that. But I'm just bringing you and inviting you to think about, well, there are maybe other forms of communication that is considered good in other traditions, right? Yeah, maybe there has to be some form of clear, confident, quick, but is it that all the time? So that's what I guess what I want to invite you to think, because in certain traditions, right, silence is golden, not silence throughout. Yep. And I guess when we're talking about good communicator, maybe not in a test setting, not in an IELTS setting, certainly not in your speaking class. But something that you need to think is to don't quickly label good communicator as this, because there are other scenarios, environment, traditions where it might not be that. It might be. Yeah, so it's inviting all of you to think about there are other traditions, there are other ways of thinking and understanding, other ways of how a good communicator looks like. But you are right, I suppose, in an exam setting, maybe that's what you expect, but should we then look into exam setting and set a different benchmarks? Yeah, so that's a big question. Should we have exams to evaluate for communication? Is that real? Is that authentic? Yep, I don't have the answer to that, but this is to invite all of you to rethink, to disrupt what you think as normal. Yep, I hope that's okay.
All right, we would like to invite any other questions from the audience. Yes.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Farah Akbar, for your presentation. I really like and I really enjoy it. My name is Khalifah. I'm a master student here. My question is, Doctor, regarding to the neutrality that you mentioned as the key takeaways. And we have to always question something that we pretend that is normal. Is it really neutral? My question is, regarding to the definition of the neutrality itself, I really like to know from your perspective. Because sometimes if neutral means doesn't support any opinion or any assumption, I think we will never find something that is totally neutral. But I believe that from your explanation, maybe I missed some points regarding to that neutrality. And I think it is really important for me myself, because I always ask and question about normal, what is normal? Does normal comes from the majority perspective or what? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you so much.
I think you've just answered your question. In that you say, does normal mean the majority? I guess that's when we talk about neutral, being, knowledge that is neutral, that sounds normal, is the one that is held by the majority. So that's what I mean by neutral, like, that the pyramids, it's Egypt. That's normal, that's neutral. Yeah, yes, the one that's borne by the majority. That's what I would think that way as well. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, from Prof. Butati.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you, Fanny. Farah, welcome to our university. We've known you like more than a year, virtually, but we are happy today to welcome you on our beautiful campus. And then you've seen some of our students and potentially your future student as well. My question, I'm going to state where I am in terms of why I'm raising this question. I'm coming, of course, from the context of the Global South. I'm also consider myself not an established scholar, but I've been educated in a Western education in the US, Can you tell how Westernized I am in terms of how it shaped myself? So I learned from my education that in order for you to engage in scholarly discussion, you need to be in the game. And this notion, or this, I think this new scholarship about decolonizing knowledge is not new in our university. Our university is a brand new one, but I think this idea has been around, introduced, one of which from the Faculty of Islamic Studies about decolonizing education, and now decolonizing education. So I didn't really study that intentionally, but I see there is a thorn in me that in one way, I see that as an opportunity that your voice is more highlighted because there is a space being opened by this discourse. But in other way, I also understand that in order for you to be in a conversation, to be counted, you have to follow the game, what is in place, yeah? So in our university, for instance, we are working really hard to get recognized by way of going to the QS, to any accreditation that we are, as international university, being recognized. But at the same time, we also would like to highlight the fact that we also have knowledge production here. So I think there is a thorn in me that in my teaching, it is very important to have the voices, diversity of voices, but also at the same time, there is also my need to have my student, especially PhD student, to be in conversation with whatever scholarship being being right now in the trend. So I think that's my concern. I want to share it with you. That's how I feel right now. Thank you.
No, thanks very much for that. I think I had a section which I deleted, which is the whole section on, like you, I was educated in the Western education system. Should I be talking about this in the first place? So that's the dilemma that we're in. I also take your point on, as a university, you want to be international, you want to be recognized internationally, and therefore you need to be able to show that we have knowledge, not just local knowledge, but also the knowledge of the fields, and we're very aware, and that we're equipping our students on that. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's not about unlearning, forgetting, deleting. It's decentering and allowing other knowledges to be part of the center. It's not about deleting. It's not about not teaching our students the dominant knowledge. They need to know that to be competitive, but also to center other knowledges as well, because there are a lot of space. So I think kudos to IIIU to be doing both, and it will take time. I don't think, it's a slow process. Even on this idea of decolonizing in the UK, it's been around for 15, 20 years, but it's a slow burner. And it takes a while to get people on board. But again, it's not about deleting, forgetting, canceling. It's about sharing that middle space. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We still have a time, I think. We invite any other questions from the audience? Yes. Can you raise your hand once more? Okay. Pak Syahid ya.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd like to ask, if talking about natural, you're talking about in the classroom that the teacher should realize about the naturality of the knowledge. Now, I would like to bring the discussion to the school itself. I think the schools need also to realize about naturality when they try to recruit the students, open recruitment for the students, because I see that some schools, they tend to set the cultural capital that students need to have first before they come to the schools. For example, in Sekolah Garuda, when they want to become the student in Sekolah Garuda, they need to have a IELTS test or TOEFL test, in which it's not familiar for students who live in rural area or who live in low economic that they can afford the test even. It's not. It's a very expensive task. They need to pay, and then they need to learn about the procedure of the task, the kind of the task. So I think, what do you think then about the schools when they to uphold the inclusion, to uphold the neutrality, and to not set a standard that it's only it's really close to the sum of the communities and try to neglecting the others, maybe like a potentials. I mean, like when the schools tends to set the cultural capital, for example, they need to fluence in English at the first year, or not even the first year. Before they come to the schools, they need to have some knowledge. What's the meaning then of the education itself if the schools cannot transform the student into such standards? And they need students to have how to say that, have the knowledge itself before they come to the schools. So I'm thinking about what the meaning of education then if the schools cannot make the students be like that with the starting point.
Okay, I'm going to try to rephrase the question because I'm not really sure. It's not your fault, it's me, because I've had a 16-hour flight yesterday. That's an excuse. So you're saying, so we're talking about, because you said about TOEFL, you mentioned TOEFL.
Yeah, TOEFL and IELTS when the students want to go to the Sekolah Garuda, for example, in which... the students need to go to Sekolah Garuda in Indonesian context, where the government provides scholarship for the students.
Oh, elite school. So an elite senior high school, so they have to have this language proficiency. And therefore, there's a standard that they have to raise.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, I got that one, sorry. And you say, so what's the point?
So the problem is that with that standard, it's only close, or it can be reached only for the elitist one, and neglecting the other students who come from rural or low economic backgrounds.
Yeah, so there's a bit of gatekeeping there.
Yeah.
Right? And gatekeeping, when we talk about TOEFL, IELTS, these are all gatekeepers, a gatekeeping mechanism. It's recording, but I'm going to have to be careful. But it's also money-making, right? It's also money-making, yeah? So this is also an element of imperialism. I mean, I'll call it as it is, because we're talking about decolonizing. So you are right. It's just an element of cultural capital there to gatekeep those who don't have access from those who do, in order to have access to this elite school, right? And then you have so what's the point? I guess it has to go back to the policies of the country, right? We really have to rethink, do we want to raise everybody, or do we want to raise a few somebodies? Yeah? And that's a very difficult conversation, which I'm not going to go because I think it's quite political. But in terms of education, if you believe education is for everybody, everybody should have access, then this gatekeeping mechanisms need to be abolished, right? We can use them in a different form, but not as a gatekeeping form, yeah? So I think that's a conversation that needs to be had, but it's going to be a long conversation. The best bet is for you to make sure you become the mantri at some point, which, inshallah, yeah. Yeah, but that's a very difficult question to answer. Yeah, thank you.
I think we still have a slot for one last question. Yes, back here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Bulkia Masud. I'm from West Sulawesi, especially in Stein Majene. My question is about this topic. My field study is educational psychology, and sometimes I find in the literature about I'm focusing now on socio-emotional learning, and I find some values from Islamic perspective about emotion. For example, if we talk about persistence and resilience, we have the values of sabar and ihsan when we want to have work for excellency and from intrinsic motivation. So how is it possible if I want to bring this idea into global domination of knowledge production in the Western discussion? Is it possible to come up with this concept of social emotional learning, especially from Islamic perspective? And I want to I want to develop my own framework in madrasah, for example. And is it possible to bring like from Quran, like the verses from Quran in the scripture, if we want to argue something, and we talk it, we bring it into discourse of Western knowledge. So,
highly,
yes.
highly possible. Have you heard of Maristan?
Sorry?
Have you heard of Maristan?
Yes, I know.
You've heard of Maristan. They're
Rania.
doing exactly what you're wanting to do. So there is this very well-known clinical psychologist in, I think it's Harvard, by the name of Dr. Rana Awad. It's Stanford. Yeah, sorry, because I traveled a long time yesterday. Yes, it's Stanford. So Dr. Rana has already started an institution that looks into clinical psychology from the Islamic perspective and has written and published a lot. So I guess the question is, how can I? Yes, you can, of course. You can do whatever you want. Can you use verses of the Quran? Of course. It is a scholarly reference, yeah? And I think the quickest way is in academia would be, I think Claire and Jérémy would agree, is to publish, yeah? So that's one way of doing that. And I think is to encourage PhDs, master students, to do the same if that's how they feel. I certainly have a few of my PhD students are looking at language autonomy from the Islamic perspective. Yeah? So it's highly possible. It's publishing, it's going out there. If not publishing, it's going on LinkedIn, sharing, social media, shout it out, because it is highly relevant. And a lot of at least what I read from Maristan is a lot of the theories that comes on clinical psychology actually comes from the Islamic perspective originally, has been taken and adapted. Hope that answers your question. Thank you very much. I think that's it.
Yes. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for your participation in the question and answer session. And please give a warm round of applause again to Dr. Farah Akbar. Again, like the last message, maybe like we shouldn't stop questioning that feels normal. We doesn't take that for granted, because what feels normal is not natural. Thank you very much. And wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much for the enlightening discussions by Dr. Farah, and I would like to kindly invite the Dean of our faculty, Prof. Nina Nurmila, Ph.D., to give a token appreciations to the speakers today. Then I would like to invite the documentation team to capture the moment. Well, thank you very much to Dr. Farah Akbar, Ph.D., the Dean of our faculty, and also Ms. Fanny that will moderate the sessions.
Thank you for the discussion. We shall now proceed to our fourth keynote sessions. It is an honor to introduce Professor Dr. Jérémy James from the Research Institute on Contemporary Southeast Asia, Thailand. He will present his keynote entitled Making Ideas Transformative, Reimagining Knowledge, Dialogue, and Educational Futures. The discussion will be led by moderator Rahayu, the PhD students batch 4. Please join me in welcoming Professor James and Rahayu.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So, good morning, distinguished Dean of Faculty of Education, the esteemed lecturer of Faculty of Education, colleague, and also dear participants. Good morning. Welcome to the second sessions of our conference today, and then it is truly a pleasure to see such a continued enthusiasm for our engagement in this conference. And then once again, before we begin, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you and thank you for being part of this conference. And your presence and participation is truly enriched our discussions for today. My name is Rahayu and I will be your moderator for today's sessions. And to begin, let me introduce you to our speakers for these sessions. His research offers a valuable perspective that strongly connects with today's theme in our conference. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jérémy James. Good morning, Professor. Sawadee ka. Professor James is a distinguished social anthropologist whose work offers a critical insight into the intersections of religions, culture, and also power in Southeast Asia. And in addition to his academic contributions, Professor James has played an important leadership, including serving as a former deputy director of the Research Institute on Contemporary Southeast Asia, IRASEC, Bangkok, Thailand. And today we are very lucky to have him with us to sharing some knowledge. And please give a warm applause to welcoming Professor Jérémy James. So, Professor, you have 20 minutes to deliver the material, and it is very interesting. And I hope we can later on get a new insight and also a new perspective from you. So, Professor James, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, well, okay. So, first of all, of course, I would like to thank the UII and the Faculty of Education for inviting me. It's a really strong, deep honor, really. Also, my warmest and sincere thanks to the Dean, Professor Nina Nurmila. Thank you so much. Of course, for the Rector and the Professor Jérémy, my esteemed, my old friend and colleagues, Dr. Andar Nubowo, thank you so much. And of course, all my new colleagues and friends, so Dr. Claire Marie Hefner, Dr. Farah Akbar, and of course, dear esteemed colleagues, dear students. So thank you so much, and I hope we will enjoy this last keynote sessions. So let me begin with a simple question. What makes an idea transformative? Is it when a brilliant thinker proposes something entirely new? Is it when a revolutionary theory replaces an older one? Universities often celebrate innovation. We talk about new technologies, digital revolutions, AI, new teaching tools, etc. But perhaps the real transformation is, especially in education, as today, but also in research, lies somewhere else. So, what if the deepest innovation does not come from new tools, but from new ways of thinking about knowledge itself? Who produce knowledge? Which academic voices are heard? Which ideas are considered legitimate? And which remain invisible, although they could be very good ideas? Also, here you see the very well-connected connection, of course, of my paper with the one of Dr. Farah. And thank you so much for this first part of my talk. Thank you so much. So, for centuries, academic knowledge has often been organized like a pyramid, here from Egypt, but it can be from Sudan as well. A few dominant intellectual traditions at the top, many others at the margins. So we have to always ask ourselves, where are we in this pyramid? But today, ideas circulate faster than ever. Scholars collaborate across continents. New intellectual traditions are emerging, interacting, sometimes challenging the frameworks we once took for granted. In this context, transformation does not necessarily mean replacing one dominant idea with another. It may mean something more subtle, perhaps more powerful, I hope. It may mean expanding the repertoire of perspective, methods, intellectual traditions that shape our understanding of the world. In this presentation, I would like to explore how we might rethink educational ecosystem in that spirit, not as spaces where one knowledge system dominates, but as places where diverse forms of knowledge can meet, interact, and transform one another. In this sense, transformative ideas are rarely solitary breakthroughs. They are collective processes, formed through dialogue, encounter, disagreement, translation, and sometimes frictions. Drawing on post-Western and autonomous knowledge perspective, as well as on personal academic experience across different intellectual contexts, I will explore how we might reimagine ecosystem capable of addressing the epistemic, the social, political challenges of our time, especially in imagining new ways, I will come back at the end of the paper, new ways of writing academia and academic knowledge. Presenting this paper is not entirely easy for me. So I will ask for your indulgence. You see, I belong to a scientific species that these days is not exactly fashionable anymore. It attracts fewer and fewer public investment, and in many places it is not longer considered as a strategic discipline, although I do think our world needs more and more this species. Pokoknya aku ahli ethnologi. Sorry for that. In short, I'm just a modest ethnologist, a social anthropologist. So now, what is an ethnologist? Basically, it said that an ethnologist studies how humans live, think, and organize themselves across cultures. That is, any group of people who share common practices, beliefs, languages, traditions, social, religious norms, or way of life. In the Indonesian context, for instance, to be an ethnologist or to be a social anthropologist could mean studying ethnic groups like the Javanese, the Batak, Minangkabau, Dayak. This is most common. But also religious communities, such as Muslim in Pesantren, Christians in Papua, Buddhist in Medan, Sufi Brotherhood in Java, and so forth. It's also occupational group. And this is really linked to also your ecosystem of education school, you know. It could be school, you know, in Java, in Sulawesi, in Sumatra. There's different way to approach schooling, teaching. Fishermen in North Sulawesi, rice farmer in Bali, tech workers in Jakarta, for instance, could be also in the map of anthropology. Also, many subcultures, skateboarding youth in Jakarta, fan of K-pop in Jogja, etc. And then you start feeling that what it's like to be an ethnologist, you begin to wonder, maybe my own culture, my own ecosystem, my own background is just as strange as the one I study. That's when you really start noticing how egocentrism, ethnocentrism shape the way we see things. In other words, an ethnologist is also someone who takes very seriously the things that everyone also considers perfectly ordinary. And that includes, of course, science itself. Ethnology may be the only scientific discipline that was born, in a sense, with an expiration date. Why? Because at the end of the 19th century, when modern academic disciplines were being established, a division of intellectual labor emerged. Sociologists claimed the study of modern societies, industrial, secularized, organized as nation-states, and the other part, ethnologists, social anthropologists, meanwhile, were assigned the study of so-called tradition societies, the people of elsewhere that were then revealingly called ethnic group. Within this grand academic division, social anthropology then thus entrusted with studying populations that were believed to belong to humanity on the verge of disappearance, soon to be swept away by the advance of the progress of modernity. This explains the sense of urgency that animated the first generation of ethnographers. They collect stories, objects, rituals, and social practices with the feeling that they were documenting worlds that might soon vanish. And some of us, I modestly include myself among them, have occasionally had the strange feeling that our discipline itself might also be approaching its own expiration date as liberalism, materialism, individualism seem to expand across the planet. But perhaps there's something even worse than that. Because ethnology, like all humanities and social sciences, is not considered a hard science. And this is where the real question begins. What does it actually mean? If the social sciences are not hard, then that must be, to be put it politely, soft. In many universities around the world, including here in Indonesia, we often hear about the distinction between hard science and soft science. I think it's ilmu keras, ilmu lunak, you think? At first sight, this seems like a simple classification. But when you hear this distinction, you might begin to suspect that something interesting is happening, not only in the organization of knowledge, but also in the hierarchy of knowledge. Because if some sciences are considered hard, then by contrast, the humanity and social sciences must appear somewhat soft. But what soft actually mean? If we look carefully at the word, we discover something quite revealing. In English and in many languages, I think it's the same in Indonesian, soft does not only mean flexible or adaptable, which is quite positive, right? But it often carries other meaning as well. Weak, something soft is weak, vague, imprecise, indecisive, loosely structured. Are we doing this kind of work? I hope not. In other words, the vocabulary itself quietly introduces an implicit hierarchy between disciplines. Therefore, I would like to thank my dear colleagues, again here, for taking the risk of inviting rather a soft researcher. But of course, this opposition between hard and soft science is somewhat misleading. Here, I rely on the work of my Ph.D. supervisor. I belong to his tradition, Bernard Formoso, and his last book, Social Science and Soft Science, the Case of Anthropology, and the big part of my work is based, presentation today is based on his volume. So, because when we look more closely at how scientific knowledge is actually produced, things become much less clear-cut. So-called hard science often appear hard, partly because they do not always reflect explicitly on the process through which the result is produced. I will explain more clearer. Yet, if we examine those processes of hard science, we discover that scientific facts are not simply discovered. They are constructed. They are constructed collectively, mostly by men, and more, fortunately, by men and women, working together within research communities, laboratories, and disciplinary networks. Scientific facts are therefore also shaped by social interactions, institutional context, funding structures, and even political priorities. Just think back to what happened during the pandemic of COVID, and it will all become pretty clear that we talk at that time of political priorities, funding structures, etc. And this is hard science. In that sense, the procedures through which knowledge is produced in physics, biology, chemistry, etc., are not fundamentally different from those used in the social sciences. Science in all fields is a collective enterprise, where social science may differ slightly in the nature of its laboratory. For physicists or chemists, the laboratory is often a highly controlled environment, populated by colleagues who share the same language of expertise. For social scientists, the laboratory is something quite different. Our laboratory is a field, is a school, for instance, in your case, is a living social world inhabited by people who often belong to very different social, cultural, economic universe. And when we enter the laboratory, we know very little. Our lab is a field full of people, as you know, who refuse your protocol. They are full of culture, surprises. We know very little when we arrive, and no, you cannot sterilize your lab, right? You cannot sterilize your school without purifying all your colleagues and students, etc. We must learn everything, the language, the code of interaction, the meanings behind everyday practices. We must even learn who we are supposed to be in that context. Because our own identity as researcher or as teacher is constantly negotiated with those around us. In other words, social science knowledge is produced through a deeply intersubjective process. And this is perhaps why social sciences are particularly aware that knowledge is always produced with others and never alone. This also invites us to question certain categories that are often taken for granted in academic life. Again, for example, we often frequently encounter the distinction between ilmu exacta and ilmu non exacta. When I first encountered this expression in Indonesia, I found it fascinating. The word exacta comes from the Dutch, exact, and it refers to the idea of precision, accuracy, exactness. But this category is not entirely innocent, because, again, if some science are exact, it logically implies that others must be somewhat less exact. And here, again, is the famous distinction between hard science and soft science. But in reality, this is not a question of rigor or exactness. It's a question of object. The social sciences work on something rather special, human beings, people who speak, think, interpret the world, and constantly give meaning to their actions. As the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu once remarked, the curse of the social sciences is that their objects speak. But the ethnologist and the social science is not a curse, it's a richness. Because the people we study are not simply objects of research, they are also partners in the production of knowledge. And ultimately, all science functions in this way, hard science and soft science, through discussions, debate, and collaboration. The difference, perhaps, is simply that the social science tend to make this process more visible. Hard sciences are often described as hard because they produce precise, rigorous, demonstrative, and supposedly objective results. But perhaps they are also called hard because they speak a little less about the process through which these results are produced, the social process. Scientific facts do not simply fall from the sky. As scholars in the sociology of science have shown, including Bruno Latour, for instance, some of you may know, scientific facts are always the result of collective process, discussions, controversies, jealousies, negotiations, interpretations within communities of researchers. In that sense, social sciences are not doing something fundamentally different. They're simply more visible, the social and collaborative dimension of knowledge production. And perhaps this is precisely where truly transformative ideas begin. Very often, they appear when we accept to question distinctions that once seems obvious. Objective versus subjective, laboratory versus fieldwork, hard science versus social science. Transformative ideas often emerge precisely at the moment when these boundaries begin to move. For example, when different disciplines begin to speak to each other, as in the case today, where you have kindly invited an ethnologist, rather explicit representative of the so-called social science, to speak in front of an audience of some sociologists, some psychologists of education, for instance. In itself, it's already a small gesture of what we call interdisciplinary. But such intellectual shift can go even further, because today another important transformation is taking place in the academic world. It concerns the growing effort to decolonize knowledge. That is to say, to recognize that knowledge does not emerge from a single center, a single tradition, or a single way of understanding the world. And perhaps this is precisely the moment where ideas become truly transformative. Let me now move to the second part of my talk. If we accept the idea that knowledge is always produced collectively and historically situated, another question inevitably arises. Where does knowledge come from? And perhaps, more importantly, who has the authority to produce it? For a long time, the global organization of academic knowledge followed a rather asymmetrical geography. Many theories about Asia, Africa, Latin America were produced in Europe or North America. Colonial institutions, universities, research centers, publishing houses, which is very important, play a decisive role in defining what counted as legitimate knowledge about these regions. But the structures of knowledge production themselves were unequal, of course. Certain perspectives became dominant, while others remained marginal or invisible or invisibilized. We can see this clearly in the history of Southeast Asian studies. Many of the early academic institutions dedicated to the study of the region emerged during the colonial period. Just for the case of the Department of Malay Studies, established in Singapore in 1955, for example, relied heavily on intellectual resources inherited from colonial academic institutions. Similarly, institutions such as SOAS in London, Leiden University in the Netherlands, of course, became major centers for the study of Southeast Asia languages and culture. These institutions produce extremely valuable scholarship, but they also contributed to establishing a geography of knowledge in which the authority to interpret Southeast Asian society were often located outside the region itself. This, again, does not mean that Western scholarship was necessarily Eurocentric in its intentions. Many scholars show genuine intellectual openness. Today, however, this intellectual landscape or geography is gradually changing. Over the past few decades, scholars have increasingly questioned these asymmetries. Many now speak of a global turn in the social sciences, reflecting the emergence of new intellectual centers and research networks across Asia, Africa, Latin America. In this context, an important idea has gained renewed attention, and you know that it's a concept, it's autonomous knowledge. Autonomous knowledge, again, does not mean rejecting Western scholarship. Rather, it means producing knowledge that is not entirely dependent on a single hegemonic intellectual framework. It means allowing concepts and theories to emerge from local histories, local languages, local intellectual traditions. This concern was already clearly articulated by the Malaysian sociologist Syed Hussein Alatas. In the 70s, he introduced a concept which is, I think, very powerful, the captive mind. And by this, he referred to the tendency of scholars in colonial society, but also in post-colonial societies, to internalize external intellectual framework so deeply that they reproduce them without questioning their relevance to local reality. The challenge, therefore, is not only external domination, it's also internal intellectual dependency. And it's a daily routine for any academic today to have this reflection. Although it would be in Indonesia, in France, in Thailand, everywhere. Recognizing this condition is an important step toward building more autonomous forms of knowledge. But autonomy should not be confused with isolation. The goal is not to reject dialogue with Western scholarship, for instance, but rather to create a more balanced conversation between different intellectual traditions. This is precisely the ambition behind what some scholars, especially Rouleau Berger, Lepelin, Kim Sung-Kook, so French, Chinese, and Korean sociologists, have called post-Western theory in social sciences. The idea is not to replace Western theory with non-Western one, but to create a more plural intellectual space in which multiple traditions interact and contribute in the production of knowledge. In this perspective, knowledge is no longer exported from a single intellectual center. It is co-produced, the term you use, Farah, across regions. It's a co-produce. This also invites us to rethink the circulation of academic expertise itself. It is still, unfortunately for me, rare, for instance, to find a Filipino scholar specialized on Thailand, a Vietnamese scholar studying Indonesia, or Indonesian scholars working on Cambodia, and vice versa. Academic specialization often continues to follow patterns shaped by colonial or geopolitical histories. One of my personal dreams would be to see a much more multi-directional circulation of knowledge, which with co-supervision of research by Western and Eastern scholars, for instance. Imagine Indonesian scholars studying French election or French corruption, a Vietnamese researcher analyzing fishing economy in southern Italy, Filipino sociologists investigating migrant communities in Europe or Middle East. This step by step happen, but so far it's very rare. In other words, a world in which everyone studies everyone else. That would be a truly global social science. But achieving such a vision requires more than international mobility or institutional partnership. It requires intellectual openness and the willingness to recognize that important theoretical insight can emerge from different cultural traditions. Indonesia itself offers, according to me, a remarkable reservoir of concepts that could enrich global social theory. Take, for instance, merantau as a concept, according to me. Merantau, unlike Western notion of migration or diaspora, merantau treats mobility as a normal social trajectory while maintaining strong ties with the place of origin. For me, it's quite fascinating to add this. Okay? It's included in the concept of merantau, not in mobility. Another example is gotong royong. More than simple collaboration, it combines, and you may excuse me for my lack of knowledge on that, but it looks combining solidarity, also mutual obligation, share responsibility within a community. So it could be a useful concept for rethinking ideas such as moral economy, the commons, local governance, for instance. Of course, we can also mention Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, the Indonesian national motto. Philosophically, it suggests that plurality is not a problem to overcome, and that unity does not necessarily require homogeneity. This idea resonates strongly with contemporary debate, especially in the West, on pluralism, on multicultural society, or even more precisely, on the peaceful coexistence of different communities. Finally, the concept of desa. Desa, also translated as village, looks, for me, referring in Indonesian anthropology to much more than an administrative unit, much more than administration. The desa can be understood as a social ecosystem that combines kinship relationship, economic activities, religious institutions, and community governance. Taking together, this example illustrates an important point. The social sciences are not simply a set of universal theories applied everywhere. They are also a space in which new concepts can emerge from local experience, circulate across context, and ultimately enrich our collective understanding of the world. And perhaps this is ultimately what it means to decolonize thought, allowing different intellectual traditions to contribute to the very language through which we describe social reality. But for such intellectual exchange to flourish, certain conditions are necessary. They require curiosity, openness, sometimes the courage to move beyond dominant academic standards. They may also require institutional support from universities, state. Finally, they require space for experimentation, alternative form of research, alternative readings, and alternative way of writing science. And this brings me to the final part of my talk, alternative academic practices. I would like to come back to the centered theme of this conference, transformative ideas. One way to recognize transformative ideas is that they often emerge when we question the forms through which knowledge itself is produced and transmitted. Not only what we know, but how we know it and how we write it. Today, we are witnessing a profound transformation in the academic world, particularly in the humanities and social sciences. Many researchers increasingly ask a simple but uncomfortable question. Are we actually ready? Yes, to publish is good. Publish or perish. But publish to who? If we are read, by whom? For whom do we write? For our peers? For our students? For the broader public? For history? For our own ego? Especially when we are read by 2 or 3 people in the world? This question emerged in a context marked by several structural transformations. First, there is an increase of academic publication. The number of articles and books continue to grow, often driven by evaluation system, ranking, performance indicators. Second, academic work itself is changing. Researchers spend increasing amount of time writing grant proposal, right? Evaluation report, right? An administrative document. Paradoxically, this sometimes leaves less time for what originally defined research, fieldwork, reflection, and writing. At the same time, universities and research institutions are increasingly asking scholars to produce a science that should be visible beyond academia, a science that should circulate in society. This tension is not new. Already several decades ago, in the 60s, the historian Pierre Nora wrote a striking sentence. Right, no one will read you. He observed that as a statement. What he was describing was a growing gap since the 60s, actually, in France, actually, between academic production and intellectual public life. Today, this gap may be widening. We also live in an information environment increasingly shaped by digital platform and algorithm. The captive mind system of algorithm, which organize the circulation of knowledge. This system promises easy access to information, such certain kind of information, actually. But they also limit exposure to complexity and reduce curiosity. This is a game, this is a rule of curiosity, of algorithm, to reduce curiosity, because it gives you what algorithm thinks you need. In such a context, transformative ideas are not only new theories, they are also new ways of narrating and sharing knowledge. And this is why we observe today a growing interest in what are sometimes called alternative academic practices. These include podcasts. Many researchers now produce podcasts. And my research institute tried to set up one podcast. And you will be, of course, welcome to have. But also there's a podcast, right, at the library. So this is a very interesting and a promising activity. Movie, film documentaries, theater, play, historical games. This is alternative writing. Many historians are involved in historical games, writing, designing games, historic. Novels, and increasingly comics and graphic narrative, graphic novels. These formats are often described as tools of popularization of science. And they are so, yes. But I would like to suggest that they raise deeper questions when scientists, when researchers use this tool. They challenge the form of scientific narration itself. They invite us to rethink the place of the researcher in the narrative. And they often bring back something that traditional academic writing has tended to hide, the presence of the researcher as a situated observer. In many cases, this format reintroduces the I of the researcher. When you have a podcast, the researcher will say, "Hi, I have conducted my research, blah, blah, blah," etc. In the graphic novel, it will be the same, etc. It's not a form of narcissism, but as a way of acknowledging that knowledge is always situated and socially constructed. The idea is actually very close to what the anthropologist Clifford Geertz described several decades ago in Indonesian context. For Geertz, the researcher is not simply a collector of data. He or she is also an author and an interpreter. And knowledge does not exist independently of writing. It's an interaction. It is constructed through what Geertz famously called thick descriptions. In other words, understanding of society is not simply about accumulating facts, it is about revealing the system of meaning through which people make sense of their world. From this perspective, the form of writing becomes part of the methodological process, of the research process. This is where graphic narrative and scientific comics or graphic novel become particularly interesting. This is just, I will come back later to this. So, to explore the possibility of graphic novel in the hand of researcher, I will briefly discuss 4 examples. This graphic novel from Alessandro Pignocchi, named Anant, the news from Jivaros Indians, is a 144-page graphic novel exploring the worldview of the Achuar Jivaro ethnic groups in the Amazonia, inspired by anthropologist, the famous anthropologist Philippe Descola. It illustrates the animist culture, where humans, animals, plants interact and converse through what they call Anant. Anant is a local term for poems, small humming poems. The book is with a preface of, and the influence actually of Philippe Descola himself, delves into the perspective of the Achuar people in their daily life within the Amazonia ecosystem. Philippe Descola is a really renowned French anthropologist, professor emeritus at the Collège de France, and a former student of the famous anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss. He is well known for developing a new framework, what we call the anthropology of nature, challenging the Western dualism between nature and cultures. So this is some page I have picked from them. This is the foreword of graphic of Philippe Descola, when he saw that all the value of the work for his own research work, actually. Because, especially in the way, and we will see later, the way the drawer have discerned a motor pattern and creative gesture in the line and colors of the drawing. And you will see how the drawing is also linked to the mindset of the Achuar. So, at the beginning, and this is interesting, the author, the drawer, say, well, why I start to draw this graphic novel? Actually, at the beginning, he wanted to have to make a film documentary. But he said, and he explained the process. You know, it's interesting to explain the social process, the funding process. And he said, well, unfortunately, it was so expensive, he cannot raise fund for the movie. So he said, okay, I go to a cheaper way, which is graphic novel. Okay? Using black and white, watercolors, it's easier than color, etc. at the beginning. Then he was also in dialogue with Philippe Descola himself. And Philippe Descola played, voluntarily the game, being interviewed by the drawer, and they share their idea and also the way to approach the fieldwork and the trip of the drawer to Amazonia. And also, the interesting thing, the researcher here takes the advantage of someone who's going back to Amazonia to correspond, to send a message to old friends. So there's a connection and interaction, a solidarity between the drawer and the researcher. Again, with Philippe Descola word, he said that drawing better than photographs, are faithful to a situation, not only because due to the artifice of composition, they can be richer in information and more dramatic in their expression, but also because they allow us to escape the illusion of documentary. A picture is not more neutral or truthful than a drawing, but a drawing makes one aware of the mediation. It performs. It is more honest. That is why Philippe the Scholar said, I also like in this book. And this is some of the drawing, watercolor use, especially when we are in Amazonia, watercolor. So watercolor is interesting because there's a fluidity between nature, culture, human beings, plants. Everything is one watercolor, you know? There's no strict, there's no big lines, you know? And this is, the drawer is in the subway, in the tube in Paris. So you see the difference between watercolor when we are in Amazonia, which is fluidity. This is animist view at perspective. And in the subway of Paris, strong is lines, you know, it's cold, it's black and white only. Very interesting. Then he did something very interesting. He decolonized knowledge. He said, okay, let's imagine, he put an hypothesis. Let's imagine that, this is the second book, that now all the world have embedded, have accepted the Achuar vision of the world. So he colonized all the world with Achuar view. So let's say that everybody now is animist now. So what can change? So he put here, you see on the top, on the right, it's an Achuar ethnologist. It's an Achuar social anthropologist who came to France to observe, to analyze French culture with the Achuar analysis. You know, this is very, very challenging for a French person as well, you know. So he saw things that we don't see. This is very interesting. I don't know where it is. Okay. Then he said, okay, let's go further. If the world is Achuar minded, okay, the Achuar perspective is dominated, that means that the politician ruling the world is also like that. So this is Angela Merkel, this is Putin, and they say, okay, she's just fish, you know, Angela Merkel, and they say, okay, I have to make a sacrifice to the fish for the soul of the fish, etc., etc. Then Putin also will get married to a papaya, you know. So he puts the limit of absurdity, of course, but it's challenge the construction we have of knowledge. This is very interesting. Another book is a 4-volume graphic novel biography that chronicles the life of the famous explorer, writer, Buddhist scholar, Alexandra David-Néel. She's a really very renowned, very famous Belgian-French explorer, spiritualist, writer, Buddhist, who became the first woman to reach the forbidden city of Lhasa in Tibet in 1924, and mostly one of the first social anthropologists. She traveled extensively through Asia, author over 30 books on Eastern philosophy, and lived to be 100 years old. This graphic novel specifically details her journey to Lhasa in Tibet, her experiences in Tibet through her relationship with and from the eyes of her assistant, Marie-Madeleine Pelleronet, who who has spent 10 years working with and assisting the ethnographer. So this is, the chronicles, 14 years ago, 14 years, Alexandra David-Néel arrived in Asia, etc., etc. Then all the past is in color, because that makes the legacy of the author, the fieldwork. Then also we have pictures of when she was still alive in the 60s. And you see, the past is in color, and the contemporary, when she was interviewed, etc., she's 1950, 54, etc., when she back home, writing, etc., she's in black and white. So it's some initiations. This is we can see the office at home, of the Alexandra David-Néel, which is quite fascinating, describing every details. I'm sure if you go in your house, all researchers, we have our own, I would say, brandtau, maybe, our own history about our mobility, right? Where we went as a scholar, as in a conference, in fieldwork, etc. So exactly what, and this is the assistant, and because of this environment, she start to scare, because she talk about spirit, etc. So this is the dreams. And which is interesting, it's how a scholar became legitimate. And there's a few pages on that describing how there's a kind of fetishism around us, how she became popular. So there's a series of people who came to her house to make her popular, very popular, actually. So there are scientists, there are some people from South America kneeling her because she believes she's like a god, a saint, There are some aristocratic women who just say, okay, read in my, you're like my fortune teller, read me, read in my third eye, blah, 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 this very esoteric thing. There's some hippie, we are in the 60s, there's some hippie who came to her office to visit her. And tourists, of course. And this is how science became legitimate as well. It's because many people came to her and visit her. The third book I really appreciate is not a scientist, is a witness of the Khmer Rouge genocide and the pre-genocide Khmer Rouge period. Serra, Mr. Serra, is the creator of this graphic novel, Cucumber Amer, Bitter Cucumber, published in 2018. Serra is a Cambodian-born artist, an author, born in Phnom Penh in 1961. He was expelled at age 13 in 1975 due to the Khmer Rouge takeover. The book, and he wrote many other books, is a biographical account of his own childhood experience, focusing on a 9-year-old boy witnessing the rise of the Khmer Rouge and the forced expulsion of his family from Phnom Penh in 1975. So this is different slides, of course, on his work, which is very well documented. So as you see, he made really strong research. He read hundreds of books, articles on the Khmer Rouge period, and he quote, like as we do as researchers, we need to refer, we need to trace the knowledge we are from, okay? So it's not only witness, but also academic work, according to me.
Prof. James, you have 5 minutes more.
Yeah, thank you. So this is, it print out, it redraw the cover of some magazine, refer to expert like Shawcross, historian, And if, at the end, this isn't so interesting, how to make graphic novel scientist. You need to follow peer review process. You need to follow a strict biography as well. It's not only your imagination. And you need to follow the same background of other journals. This one is a contribution of historian to the history of France, for instance. There are very little details about the First World War, the general who described the battles, etc. We have the psychology of the general, so we have some record about what he thought at that time before engaging the war, etc. Also, some invisibilized people until recently is the role of the woman during the First World War. So there's, of course, this graphic novel talk about that. So, for a long time, comics were not considered as legitimate intellectual medium. Compared with cinema, literature, they enter the field of academic reflection quite late. Yet today, they are increasingly used to explore historical, anthropological, political questions. Why? Because drawing offers something that traditional academic prose or writing sometimes struggles to provide. It can visualize complex social situations immediately, often with remarkable economy of means. Instead of writing 20 pages, you have one drawing. It can represent gestures, environment, emotions, interactions that would require long description in written forms. And perhaps most importantly, it can make visible something central to social science research, the experience of the field itself and the intersubjective nature of fieldwork. This raises important methodological questions. Introducing narrative, image, sometimes autobiographical element, inevitably, obviously create a degree of subjectivity. Does this threaten scientific rigor? Not necessarily, as I said previously. On the contrary, acknowledging subjectivity can strengthen scientific responsibility. Because it forces the researcher to make explicit their position, their choices, and the conditions under which knowledge were produced. In that sense, and I follow here again Farah, alternative forms of writing can reinforce a central principle of the social sciences, reflexivity, reflection. However, this approach also has limits and risk in this kind of alternative writing. Perhaps the most important risk is the heroization of the researcher. Because the researcher becomes a hero. That is the red line. We cannot, of course, cross this line. The challenge is therefore to maintain a balance, to integrate narrative and subjective without abandoning analytical rigor. That can become a genuine form of knowledge. And as a conclusion, transformative ideas do not simply replace the past. They rarely appear as radical breaks. Most often, they multiply possibilities. They emerge with intellectual tradition meet, when knowledge travels across regions and disciplines. In that sense, transformative ideas are often born at the intersection between discipline, culture, method, sometimes different form of writing. And this is perhaps where transformative ideas truly begin. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor James, for such a brief explanations. So basically, like today's sessions, like really invites us to move beyond comforting assumptions that, like in a prior session for Dr. Farah before, said that knowledge is never natural, you know, like the objective and also the purely academic. So it is interesting how we see that actually knowledge is based on how it is produced by the particular social and also cultural and of course the institutional context. So as we move through these discussions, I think I invite only like 1 or 2 questions, you know, to reflect more critically, not only on what knowledge is being produced like Prof. James said before, but we need to see the process behind. So yeah, the first questions from Pa Alpha.
Thank you from Prof. Jérémy for your very stimulating presentations. I really appreciate the effort to connect decolonizing knowledge with alternative academic practices, including new ways of writing, narrating, and sharing knowledge. But my question is, will this epistemic shift alone be enough to shape the future of civilization in Asia? Because civilization is built not only by soft knowledge, but also by science, technology, and innovation. So in today's digital and AI-driven world, how can the social sciences move beyond critique and make a concrete, tangible contribution to shaping technology, knowledge production, and civilizational directions? So not only reflective, but also generative. Thank you.
Thank you, Alpha.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Well, it's a tough question about civilization. I'm not sure I have the answer. You know, this is very philosophical question, and but also very pragmatical. We can call, not in the sky or in the wind, but also to make it concrete, call some more interdisciplinary practice and collaboration between hard and soft science, for instance. To not put strong borders between them, you know. I do believe that if we have a strong sponsor, we can do very strong input, and to have a strong output actually, and then to have big changes in the process. For instance, if we systematically decide that, okay, now we co-supervise a PhD, for instance, you know, it's a rule. So with someone with the West, or from different, not necessarily from the West, but for instance, a Chinese sociologist of education with an Indonesian sociologist of education. Why not? This is good, you know, and I think that can change the step by step the different limit of our knowledge. About AI, AI is quite challenging for everyone, of course. And you know, I have a colleague in Thailand, a French colleague. He's a geographer, and he will be publishing a paper on how to name the new era generated by AI. You know, you had the Anthropocene, calling of a civilization. So it's how the world is in the hand, is dependent on humans. You know, everything is doing of human and human predation, human extraction, human power, women, etc. And men, sorry, men and women, of course, but humanity. How humanity have an impact on the earth. on Earth, right? This is Anthropocene. You have also now how to name the period under AI. So he will be publishing a paper on that. This is very interesting because there's a lot of debate on the way we should learn and how we date the beginning. And we will agree that the beginning of this new era, which is not in our hand actually anymore, but in the end of AI, it's 2023. It's not the beginning. For me, as a professor in Sciences Po Lyon, I used to be at that time, I see a major difference and major gap between before 2023 and after 2023. It's just because in 2023, my student never stopped making some grammar, orthograph mistake. Automatically, AI took care with all the graphic, the grammar and the orthograph mistakes. And this is it was a big gap for me. And I think it's an AI scene, so my colleague, I will send you the paper as soon as he published, because I think it's interesting, it's very challenging. We really need to think, we are not still aware what AI is, because it's self-generating knowledge. Okay, yes.
Yeah, and also, Prof. James, Dr. Alpha also asked you about how can social science move beyond critique? So how social science move beyond critiques? Because we know that research in social science is never natural and it's only a myth. And then how we as the researchers positions ourselves in terms of, like you mentioned before about the exacta and also non-exacta. And then how do you think that this kind of social science that we can move beyond all the critics about it?
Maybe I just try to, I don't know if it works. Yeah, I don't know. No, it's okay. I refer to the book I have edited with Victor King, The Fieldwork and the Self. And in this book, it's an editing volume, and we collect the testimony of more than 15 colleagues working in Southeast Asia. Some are Southeast Asians, Filipino, Bruneian, Malaysian, etc., etc. And some are Western working in Southeast Asia. And we say, okay, how you interact yourself as a researcher with the fieldwork you are working on. And I'd like to make a homage here to one of my dear friends who passed away a couple of years ago. He's a Malaysian, Professor Wan Zawawi. I'm not sure if you know him. He used to be an incredible singer as well. And he contributed with a chapter in this book. It's maybe one of his last chapter. Wan Zawawi comes from a fisherman tradition, fisherman village, but he became at the top of the elite. He was at the bottom of the pyramid, and then he was at the top of the pyramid. And around his 70s, he decided to write a paper on his memory. So he applied the Merantau concept himself. He said, okay, I tried to remember how was my fisherman village when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, to reconstruct my knowledge, and how this part is part of my knowledge until 70, until his old age. This is fascinating. This is an interaction between the self of the researcher and the reflection, and the continuous reflection we should have. I would say that in social sciences we have strong tools to use it. So it's good to have to mobilize them.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. James, for the explanations. But I think I'm so sorry because we don't have any more time. So maybe like if you have a questions, maybe you can email Prof. James because you will. Prof. James will be very open to get your questions. But we also get reminded from the MC that we don't have more time. So I think thank you so much, everyone, for the participation. So let's have a big applause for Prof. James. Thank you so much for coming to Triple IU, Prof. James. And then I think that's all from me and also Prof. James. See you on the next change, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm giving back to the MCs.
Thank you for the moderator for leading the sessions. Now, we would like to invite the PIC of this international conference to give the token appreciations to the speaker. We would like to invite Mr. Andar Nubowo, Ph.D., to give the token appreciations to Professor Jérémy James. Then we would like to invite the documentation team to capture the moment. Thank you very much to Mr. Andar Nubowo, Ph.D., and also Professor Jérémy James.